Day 270 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. And as always, I'll start off with those Russian military losses, so as of the 20th of November, in the last 24-hour reporting period, so there has been an additional 330 Russian military personnel losses, so up to 84,210 approximately so far. But a bit of a quieter day because we look at the hardware as well, and armoured combat vehicles, an extra 2, tanks 1, and artillery 1 lost there for the Russian forces. Then we'll jump back to the main map and we'll start out in Russia, where a main gas pipeline exploded in St. Petersburg. So the second biggest city in Russia, quite close to Finland in fact. Now this pipeline supplied gas to the Nord Stream 1 as well as to Gazprom stations, which is a Russian energy giant. Now the Nord Stream 1 supplies gas from Russia to continental Europe. So start buying some of those liquefied natural gas contracts because gas prices could soon rise on this news. News, by the way, that has had surprisingly limited activity amongst the main media outlets so far. Now, clearly some sabotage was, or foul play, was likely involved with this event, but we'll need to wait until there's more detailed information on this soon enough. Needless to say, it's going to take a lot more than just Ivan the Smoker to make something like this happen. Then we'll move back to the main Ukrainian map, so go back down there, where Russia has been targeting the Ukrainian energy infrastructure for some time now, flat out admitting that these attacks are designed to cut Ukrainian civilians from power this wintertime, so as to make the population have a change of heart, or maybe overwhelmingly start to support Russia somehow, basically to cause them to have protests about the Ukrainian war. But the good news here is that Ukraine was already expecting this approach from Russia anyway, as Russia had actually played their hands way too early in about July time, if you do remember, this year, when Russia started to slow down gas supply to Europe significantly from the Nord Stream 1 pipeline there, causing Ukraine and Europe at large to expect to seek alternative power means for the winter. Now, Europe is helping Ukraine mitigate power outages by the way of things like additional gas supplies, power infrastructure repair equipment, and countless electricity generators as well. But we'll really move into the nitty-gritty of the map here today, and we'll start out in the Sumy Oblast, so right around here, bordering the Russian Federation, where miraculously this oblast has gone without any Russian shelling for the past 24 hours. It's quite rare. So the Sumy Oblast governor said that it was, quote, one of the few days when silence reigned in the border regions of Sumy. And basically Russia's approach in this district for the war has been to pretty much indiscriminately shell over the border to keep Ukrainian forces held up in this region so as to not allow those Ukrainian troops and formations to go to other areas such as the central Donbass or the south to assist with other front lines. But an actual example of some of the useless Russian strikes here have included hitting pigsties and grass. They've really not been going for much in the way of strategic military targets in this region otherwise. Then we'll move across to the Donbass here for the day, so where it's been noted that there's been quite the build-up of Russian troops in the Donbass front lines, particularly in the northern area, so the Luhansk Oblast there. And so there's a lot of reports and analysts particularly have indicated that a lot of these troops have come from the Kherson front line, where they're no longer really needed. But having said all that, the Russian forces in this region are also setting up additional checkpoints to identify and detain any deserters as well. So any Russian forces or units or soldiers deserting this location, which they have done quite a bit already. Then we'll move down to more in the central Donbass region, where there's been a number of attacks by the Russian forces along that central Donbass area that have been repelled by the Ukrainian armed forces today, including areas like Bilarivka up there to the north of the map at the moment, Spern, Yakovlivka, and Bakhmut. But let's take a look at the attack on Bakhmut, for instance. So I'll zoom in right there. So just for something different, the Russian forces took huge losses from an uncoordinated frontal assault on Bakhmut earlier today. You see, the Russian units would love to come through the front door to Bakhmut. So we're talking about the T-54 main arterial road here. However, the Ukrainian armed forces have methodically targeted this road in a pretty amazingly systematic and orderly manner with artillery. In other words, that is to say, quote-unquote, fire control. In fact, just the opposite intended result happened for the Russian forces on the map in the last 24 hours. So you can see a decisive push by the Ukrainian forces, completely controlling some land just east of Bakhmut. But let's just say Russia takes the settlements of Ivanrad and Opitne to the south, which I do think an extra 300,000 mobilized Russian conscripts will actually achieve at some point. But they would then have to contend with the same type of Ukrainian fire control issues that exist currently there in the east as well, as they come up this south main road to try to reach Bakhmut. Oh, but also check out this sloping topography in this region. So just yet another uphill battle for the Russian army. But having said all of this, that's not even really the full story here still, because if Russia stops attacking, say from the south or the east, this will then just free up Ukrainian units for more of a decisive counteroffensive push. And the Russian army is ordered to not lose even 1 inch of land gains made here over the past 6 or 9 months. And all of this actually leads to all of this Russian cannon fodder that we see, particularly in this very region. So in the end, it's really quite a multifactorial situation that exists here. Then we'll move across to, let's see, next up in the Zaporizhia region, in particular the Melitopol, occupied area of Melitopol, where pro-Ukrainian residents wanted to get rid of the Russian tricolour. So that's just another word for the flag, the Russian flag. They wanted to get rid of it so much that they burned it along with the House of Culture in a clear ongoing show of resistance to anything Russist. And this is all happening in a Russian-occupied region where, about 8 weeks ago, the civilian population apparently voted in a landslide victory to become annexed to Russia. Seems like a bit of a sham referendum if you ask me. Then we'll move across to Kherson, where due to the train line services between Kyiv and Kherson coming back online in less than 2 weeks after the liberation of the North Bank, might I add, pretty impressive, many families reunite for the first time since the war outbreak began in the region. But also, in the very same spirit of this, cellular services at Kherson's North Bank have also been repaired as well. Again, less than 2 weeks after liberation, so all restored, much of it restored there, including 52 cellular bases and 3 cell towers. But we'll zoom in a bit here to a bit more specifically the Olenchky district right there, where the Russian forces are facing some serious artillery and other precision targeting by the Ukrainian forces, causing some very serious and difficult circumstances for the Russian forces staged in that frontline area right there. In fact, some Russian sources have indicated that the Russian forces are preparing to withdraw from this settlement altogether in the upcoming weeks. Although probably not a good idea from a Russian military strategic point of view, as it's actually considered quite the strategic midpoint along the South Dnieper River, really the middle of the defensive lines that Russia has created there, in other words. So a lot of analysts, military analysts, suggest that if Russia does indeed lose Olenchky, then they will be dealing with an entire collapse of the front lines, mostly due to Olenchky's rather central positioning in this region in terms of their defense lines. But either way, when the Ukrainian forces push Russia back from these defensive lines or points here, I'm really quite excited to see what type of fast-paced ingenuity Ukraine utilizes to effectively traverse the river to sustain all of their supply and logistics requirements. But no doubt they'll be using a multitude of different methods, pontoons, ferries, all sorts of things. And the good thing of which for all of that is that Russia doesn't actually really have the technical military capability to take out the, say, future Ukrainian pontoons that are created. I mean, they just don't have the right weaponry to do it. Because the Russian forces actually don't have something comparable to the HIMARS system that the Ukrainians use, so the high precision guided missile system or the Excalibur shells, those sorts of things. So yeah, Ukraine can traverse rivers quite easily, whereas Russia has always had issues with any of these, let's call them land obstacles. Then we'll move across to some news for today. So it's being confirmed in the last few days that some Russian soldiers are now equipping themselves with Iranian-produced gear, such as helmets and body armor, probably in limited numbers. Now, I'd say this gear is probably better quality than much of the Russian-produced or China-sourced or purchased Alibaba airsoft body armor. And I'm not even kidding about that shamefully embarrassing and recent Russian occurrence where some of the newly freshly minted conscripts were receiving airsoft body armor. Although interestingly, Ukraine has already somewhat pivoted to a lot of winter camouflage gear. While we still see a lot of Russian forces in the green summer camo gear, which is a bit peculiar because if Russia doesn't pivot faster to this methodology as well of better camouflage gear, because they leave themselves open to easier outside identification, green in a white snow field, and any military should really adopt the camouflage color of the terrain. Obviously, I mean the need for camouflage actually has its origins from military warfare itself, so that would be a no-brainer. Then we'll move across to some other news today. So Rishi Sunak, the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, has made his first official visit to Ukraine earlier today and met up with President Zelensky. Now, on the back of that, he pledged a $59 million defense aid package that will include 125 anti-aircraft guns to counter missiles and drones as well, which is pretty impressive. That's a big number, 125. He also reaffirmed the UK's support for Ukraine, as being the new PM, of course, saying, quote, "We are with you all the way." Then in some other news, this is a bit of milestone news. So the Ukrainian army has now destroyed or captured a visually confirmed 1,500 Russian tanks since the beginning of this war this year. And of that, more than a third of these have been captured captured for use by the Ukrainian forces as well. Then we'll move lastly for the news to have a look at this. So in a change of tempo, it seems for German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in a conversation with Putin urged Putin to withdraw troops from Ukraine so negotiations could begin. He also went on to say that no one has the right to appropriate someone else's territory and no country can be considered the backyard of another. So this is quite the change and quite strong political rhetoric that Olaf, or our boy Scholz, is now getting into. So that's somewhat impressive, I think. Then in another Russian mobilization blunder. So in this video, basically we have a Russian mobilized soldier, or many of them lining up to reach the Russian mobilization officer to receive their soldier uniforms. Now, the officer is handing out the gear, and the officer is clearly dissatisfied and angry with the job or with the situation going on. So in this example, he first starts asking the conscript for his shoe size. The conscript says 43. The officer yells at him and says, "We don't have 43. Then he throws at him a size 45. Here's a 45. Then he asks the conscript for his uniform size. Conscript says the number, so 43. Officer yells again and throws him a size 56. And just like the cameraman behind him in the line, who's whipped out his camera phone to record this whole event, I would have done the exact same thing to show the poor and insufficient treatment of soldiers in the army. Then just lastly, a bit of a funny to round it all off with today, guys. So it's actually mobilization related. So we have these newly mobilized Russian soldiers reviewing the quality and livability standards of a tent they've been assigned to. Now, these are one of the larger military tents, about the size of a living room, or spans sometimes quite even a bit bigger. But a couple of things to mention here. So first of all, the Russian soldiers reviewing the place, they say everything's broken, the beds are broken, there's a pea of puddle that I think is frozen, the stove is broken, holes are everywhere, it just all reeks of urine and, of course, garbage everywhere. And that's not even the worst part in my opinion, because the location of this tent is not in some distant frontline battlefield location in Ukraine's Donbass, but rather this is in the Russian Oblast of Omsk, at the first staging ground for new conscripts. So living in squalor with a capital S for certain, even before they hit the front lines. So that's pretty much it, guys. A bit of a shorter day, obviously, for this video. It's just not as being so action-packed, so to speak, in terms of news or happenings on the ground. But I find sometimes on the weekend that actually does seem to be consistent with other weeks there. So yeah, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.